The conference room door slammed shut. Veronica Lawson stood at the head of the table, her sharp gaze cutting through the assembled executives like a blade. "This financial analysis is garbage," she said, her voice low and lethal. "We're 2 weeks from the IPO, and you're telling me the numbers don't add up?" Ethan Kramer, the lead financial analyst, shifted in his seat. "I'll need a few days to." A voice from the back of the room interrupted. "You don't need days. The problem is in working capital. You've conflated it with depreciation." Every head turned. Daniel Brooks stood near the door, mop in hand, water bucket at his feet. Veronica's eyes narrowed. "You know finance? Leave. Now." The room fell silent. No one moved. No one breathed. They had no idea what was about to happen. Veronica Lawson had built her empire on 2 principles: trust no one, and never show weakness. At 35, she was the youngest CEO in Lawson & Reed's 70-year history. The Wall Street Journal had called her the lioness of corporate America. Forbes had put her on their cover. But those who worked closest to her knew the truth. She was brilliant, yes. Ruthless, absolutely. But beneath the tailored suits and the icy composure was a woman who had been betrayed once too often. 5 years ago, she trusted her business partner with a major acquisition. He'd sold her out to a competitor, nearly destroying the company. She'd clawed her way back, but the wound never healed. Now she trusted only herself. Her office was on the 42nd floor, all glass and steel, overlooking the city like a fortress. She arrived at 6 every morning and left after midnight. She had no husband, no children, no friends. Just work. Just control. Just survival. Daniel Brooks lived in a different world entirely. 40 floors below Veronica's office, he pushed a mop across marble floors that reflected lights he'd never reach. He was 39, but he looked older. His hands were calloused, his shoulders permanently bent from years of work that required him to disappear. No one looked at janitors. That was the point, but Daniel hadn't always been invisible. 8 years ago, he'd been a rising star at J.P. Morgan, one of the sharpest financial analysts in New York. His models had saved clients millions. His insights had shaped billion-dollar deals. He'd had a corner office, a 6-figure salary, and a future that seemed limitless. Then his wife, Elena, got sick. Cancer. Aggressive. Expensive. Their insurance covered some of it, but not enough. Daniel drained their savings, sold their apartment, took out loans he couldn't afford. He worked around the clock, trying to earn enough to pay for experimental treatments. But the system wasn't built for people like him. Elena died on a Tuesday morning, in a hospital room that smelled like bleach and broken promises. Daniel held her hand until it went cold. 3 weeks later, he quit his job. He couldn't go back to that world. Couldn't pretend that the numbers on a spreadsheet mattered when the only number that mattered was 0. 0 heartbeats. 0 future. 0 hope. He moved to a smaller city, found work as a night janitor, and focused on the one thing that still mattered: his daughter. Sophie was 7 now, with her mother's dark curls and her father's quiet intensity. She was smart, curious, and heartbreakingly kind. Every morning, Daniel walked her to school. Every afternoon, he picked her up. They'd go to the park or the library, or just sit on the couch and draw together. Sophie loved to draw. She filled notebooks with crayon sketches of superheroes and princesses and families that looked like theirs. One day, she drew a picture of Daniel in a cape. "That's you, Daddy," she said. "You're a secret superhero." Daniel smiled, but his chest ached. He didn't feel like a superhero. He felt like a man who'd failed at everything that mattered. At night, after Sophie went to sleep, he'd put on his janitorial uniform and head to Lawson and Reed. He'd clean the floors, empty the trash, and listen to the hum of a building that never truly rested. Sometimes, late at night, he'd walk past the conference rooms and see the whiteboards covered in financial projections. His fingers would twitch. He'd want to pick up a marker, to fix the errors he saw, to prove that he still remembered how to do the thing he'd once been great at. But he never did. That life was over. He'd made his choice. Sophie had taped one of her drawings inside his locker at work. It showed 3 people holding hands: a tall man, a small girl, and a woman with a smile. Daniel never asked who the woman was supposed to be. He was afraid of the answer. Veronica's world was slipping. The IPO was supposed to be her crowning achievement, the deal that would cement her legacy. But the financial model was broken, and no one on her team could figure out why. She'd spent 3 days reviewing the numbers herself, searching for the flaw. Nothing. Now, standing in the conference room, she felt the walls closing in. And then this janitor, this nobody, had the audacity to speak up. She opened her mouth to unleash the full force of her fury. But Lucas Reed, her co-founder, and the only person in the building whose opinion she occasionally respected, raised a hand. "Let him talk," Lucas said. Veronica's jaw tightened. "You cannot be serious. What's the harm?" Lucas leaned back in his chair, his expression unreadable. "If he's wrong, we lose 30 seconds. If he's right, we save the deal." Daniel didn't wait for permission. He walked to the whiteboard, picked up a marker, and began to write. His handwriting was neat, precise. He drew a quick diagram, labeling columns: revenue, expenses, working capital, depreciation. Then he circled 2 numbers. "Here," he said, "you've counted depreciation twice, once as an operating expense, and again in your capital adjustments. It's inflating your costs and making your cash flow look weaker than it is." Ethan stared at the board. His face went pale. "Oh my God." Veronica stepped closer, her eyes scanning the diagram. Her mind raced through the calculations. He was right. Completely, undeniably right. One of the senior investors, a silver-haired man named Gregory Hale, leaned forward. "Where did you learn to do that?" Daniel set the marker down. "Wharton." The room erupted. Executives whispered to each other. Ethan looked like he wanted to disappear. Veronica stood frozen, her hands clenched at her sides. She'd just been corrected. Publicly. By a janitor. Lucas was smiling. Veronica didn't sleep that night. She sat in her office, staring at the corrected financial model on her screen. It was perfect. Elegant. The kind of work that only someone with years of experience could produce. She opened her laptop and ran a background check on Daniel Brooks. What she found made her stomach turn. Daniel had been a star. Published papers. Keynote speeches. Recommendations from some of the biggest names in finance. And then, 8 years ago, nothing. No scandal. No criminal record. Just silence. She dug deeper. Found an obituary for Elena Brooks. Found a mortgage default notice. Found a custody agreement showing that Daniel had sole custody of a daughter named Sophie. Veronica sat back in her chair. She didn't know what to feel. Respect? Guilt? Anger? The next evening, she found herself lingering in the building after hours. She told herself it was to review contracts, but that was a lie. She wanted to see him. She found Daniel on the 34th floor, wiping down glass partitions with methodical care. He didn't notice her at first. She watched him work, surprised by the quiet efficiency of his movements. "You didn't tell anyone," she said. Daniel looked up, unsurprised. "Tell them what?" "That you used to be somebody." He returned to his work. "I'm still somebody, just not the somebody you're thinking of." Veronica stepped closer. "Why did you leave?" "That's none of your business. You made it my business when you corrected me in front of my entire board." Daniel paused. For a long moment, he didn't speak. Then he set down his cloth and met her eyes. My wife died because I couldn't afford to save her. I spent years chasing money, thinking it mattered. It didn't. So I stopped." Veronica felt something crack inside her chest. She turned and walked away before he could see her face. The next day, she followed him. She didn't plan to. She just found herself in her car, trailing his old sedan as he left the building at dawn. He drove to a small elementary school on the edge of the city. A little girl with dark curls ran out of the building and threw herself into his arms. Daniel caught her, spinning her around, and for the first time since Veronica had met him, he smiled. She watched them walk hand in hand to a park. Watched Daniel push Sophie on a swing. Watched them sit on a bench, sharing a sandwich. There was no nanny, no help, just a father and his daughter. That night, Veronica saw them again. She'd parked across from Daniel's apartment building, feeling like a stalker but unable to leave. Through a ground-floor window, she saw Sophie sitting at a small table, drawing. Daniel sat beside her, his head resting on his hand. Exhausted, but present. Sophie held up a picture. "Daddy, do you like your job?" Daniel hesitated. "It's a job, sweetheart. But do people know you're smart?" He didn't answer. Veronica drove home and cried for the first time in 5 years. Lucas found her in her office the next morning. "I want to offer him a position," he said. Veronica looked up from her coffee. "As what?" "A janitor with a business card." "As a consultant." "Temporary. Just for the IPO." She shook her head. "The board will never approve it. The board will approve whatever we tell them to approve. You know that." Veronica stared out the window. She hated the idea. Hated that this man had disrupted her carefully controlled world. But she couldn't deny the truth. "They needed him. Fine," she said. "But I'm handling it." She found Daniel that evening in the storage closet, organizing cleaning supplies. "We want to hire you," she said without preamble. Daniel didn't look up. "I have a job. A real job. Restructuring the IPO financials. 3 weeks. $50,000. That got his attention. He turned to face her, his expression unreadable. "Why?" "Because you're the best person for it. I'm a janitor. You're a financial analyst pretending to be a janitor. There's a difference." Daniel crossed his arms. "And after 3 weeks? You go back to your life. We go back to ours." He studied her for a long moment. Then he nodded. "I'll need access to the raw data. And a quiet office." "Done." As she turned to leave, he spoke again. "I'm not doing this for you." Veronica stopped. "Then why?" "Because my daughter asked me if people know I'm smart. I'd like to show her the answer is yes." Daniel worked at night, after Sophie went to sleep. Veronica gave him a small office on the 39th floor, away from the executives who whispered about the janitor consultant. He didn't care. He had a whiteboard, a computer, and access to the company's financial records. That was all he needed. The IPO model was a mess, not just the working capital error, but a dozen smaller issues that compounded into chaos. Daniel worked through them methodically, rebuilding the structure from the ground up. At 2 a.m, Veronica found him still at his desk, surrounded by spreadsheets. "You should go home," she said. "I will. Soon." She noticed a drawing taped to his monitor. A crayon sketch of a man at a desk, with "Daddy the Hero" written at the top in shaky letters. "Your daughter?" Veronica asked. "Sophie. She thinks I'm doing something important." "You are?" Daniel looked at her, surprised. It was the first kind thing she'd said to him. Veronica felt uncomfortable under his gaze. She left without another word. But the next morning, she had a coffee delivered to his office. No note, just coffee. 3 days later, Daniel finished the revised model. He presented it to Lucas and Veronica in a private meeting before bringing it to the full board. Lucas reviewed the numbers in silence, his expression growing more impressed with each page. "This is exceptional work," he said finally. Veronica said nothing. She'd already reviewed it. She knew it was perfect. But admitting that felt like surrendering ground she couldn't afford to lose. The board meeting was scheduled for the following afternoon. Veronica barely slept. When the time came, Daniel stood at the front of the conference room, the same space where she'd humiliated him 2 weeks earlier. This time, he wasn't holding a mop. He walked them through the revised model with calm precision, answering questions, clarifying assumptions, demonstrating a mastery of the material that left no room for doubt. Gregory Hale leaned back in his chair. "This is the best analysis I've seen in 20 years. Another board member nodded. I moved to approve the revised model. But then Charles Whitmore, a senior investor known for his traditional views, spoke up. I have a question. The room fell silent. Mr. Brooks, Whitmore said, his tone skeptical. You're a janitor. Daniel met his gaze. I was a janitor. Now I'm a consultant. For 3 weeks. And then I go back to being a father. Whitmore smirked. So we're trusting our IPO to a man who mops floors. Is that what we've come to? Veronica felt a surge of anger rise in her chest. She opened her mouth to speak. But Daniel beat her to it. You're not trusting me, Daniel said evenly. You're trusting the work. If the work is wrong, reject it. But if it's right, it doesn't matter whether I mop floors or sit in a corner office. Whitmore had no response. Veronica stood. The work is right, she said, her voice cutting through the tension. Mr. Brooks identified an error that our entire financial team missed. He rebuilt a model that will save this IPO. And if anyone in this room has a problem with that, they can take it up with me. The room was silent. Then Lucas raised his hand. I approve the model. One by one, the other board members followed. Even Whitmore, though his expression was sour. After the meeting, Veronica found Daniel in the hallway. You didn't have to defend me, he said. I wasn't defending you. I was defending the work. Is there a difference? She didn't answer. But as she walked away, she realized there was. And that terrified her. That night, Daniel waited by the elevators, ready to leave. Veronica stepped out of her office, her coat draped over one arm. They stood in awkward silence. Thank you, she said finally. For what? For being right. Daniel almost smiled. Is that hard for you to say? Harder than you know. They stepped into the elevator together. As the doors closed, Daniel spoke quietly. I know what you think of me. Veronica stiffened. I don't think anything of you. Yes, you do. You think I'm just a janitor playing dress-up. You think this doesn't belong to me anymore. She turned to face him. And what do you think of me? I think you're terrified, Daniel said. I think you've built walls so high you can't see over them anymore. And I think you don't know what to do with someone who doesn't want anything from you. The elevator reached the ground floor. The doors opened. Veronica stepped out, without looking back. But her hands were shaking. Veronica couldn't stop thinking about him. It was infuriating. She'd spent years building a life where emotions didn't matter, where control was everything. And now this man, this quiet, broken man, had cracked something open inside her that she didn't know how to close. She started working later, not because she had more to do, but because she knew Daniel would be in the building. She'd find excuses to walk past his office, to see if his light was still on. One night, she found him asleep at his desk, his head resting on a stack of financial reports. She stood in the doorway, watching the rise and fall of his chest. For a moment, she considered waking him. Instead, she draped her coat over his shoulders and left. The next morning, the coat was folded neatly on her desk with a note. Thanks. D. She kept the note. A week later, the IPO launched. It was a massive success. The stock price soared. The board was thrilled. Veronica should have been celebrating. Instead, she felt hollow. Because Daniel's 3 weeks were up. His contract was over. On his last day, she found him packing up the small office. You could stay, she said from the doorway. Daniel looked up. As what? As whatever you want. Consultant. Advisor. Partner. I'm not looking for a career. Then what are you looking for? He set down the box he'd been packing. I'm looking for a life where my daughter doesn't have to wonder if I'm proud of what I do. Veronica stepped into the room. And you can't have that here? I don't know. For a long moment, they just looked at each other. Then Veronica did something she hadn't done in years. She let her guard down. When I was 12, she said quietly, my father told me I'd never be good enough, that I'd spend my whole life trying to prove him wrong and still fail. Daniel waited. I've spent every day since trying to prove him wrong. and I thought that meant being perfect, being untouchable. Her voice cracked. But you're right. I am terrified. Because if I'm not perfect, then maybe he was right. Daniel crossed the room and stood in front of her. Your father was wrong, he said. You don't need to be perfect. You just need to be real. Veronica felt tears slip down her cheeks. She hated it, hated the vulnerability, but she couldn't stop. I don't know how to be real, she whispered. Yes, you do. You were real when you defended me in that boardroom. You were real when you left your coat on my shoulders. He reached out and gently wiped a tear from her face. You're real right now. She laughed, a broken sound. I've been horrible to you. Yes. And you don't hate me? No. Why not? Daniel smiled, sad and warm. Because I know what it's like to lose everything. And I know what it's like to be so scared of losing again that you stop living. I wouldn't wish that on anyone. Veronica closed her eyes. When she opened them, she said, Come to dinner. Tomorrow night. Why? Because I want to meet your daughter. Daniel hesitated. Then he nodded. Okay. The next evening, Veronica stood outside Daniel's apartment building, holding a bag of takeout and questioning every decision that had led her to this moment. She almost turned around, but then the door opened, and Sophie appeared, her face lit with excitement. Are you Daddy's friend? Veronica crouched down to her level. I think so. I'm Veronica. I'm Sophie. Do you want to see my drawings? Before Veronica could answer, Sophie grabbed her hand and pulled her inside. The apartment was small but warm. The walls were covered with Sophie's artwork. A worn couch sat in the center of the living room. Daniel stood in the kitchen, looking nervous. Sophie, let Miss Lawson breathe. It's okay, Veronica said. She sat on the floor as Sophie spread out her drawings. This one's Daddy when he was a superhero. And this one's me and Daddy at the park. And this one's... She paused, holding up a drawing of 3 people holding hands. This one's our family. Someday. Veronica's throat tightened. It's beautiful. They ate dinner together, sitting around the small table. Sophie asked 100 questions. Her curiosity, boundless. Veronica found herself laughing, really laughing. For the first time in years. After dinner, Sophie fell asleep on the couch, her head resting on Veronica's lap. Daniel sat beside them, his expression soft. She likes you, he said quietly. I like her. She drew you, you know. In that picture, the woman holding our hands. She drew you before she even met you. Veronica looked down at the sleeping child, her heart breaking open. How did she know? Kids see things we don't. They sat in comfortable silence, until Daniel carried Sophie to bed. When he returned, Veronica was standing by the window, looking out at the city lights. I don't know how to do this, she said. Do what? Be a person. Be someone who belongs in a life like this. Daniel stepped beside her. You don't have to know. You just have to try. She turned to face him. What if I fail? Then you fail. But at least you'll have tried. Veronica reached out and took his hand. It was rough, calloused, real. I spent my whole life thinking I had to be strong alone. But standing here with you, I feel stronger than I ever have. Daniel squeezed her hand. You were never weak, Veronica. You were just afraid. I'm still afraid. So am I. They stood there, 2 broken people holding on to each other. And for the first time in years, neither of them felt alone. Over the next few weeks, things shifted. Lucas approached Daniel with an offer. A permanent position as a financial advisor. But this time, Daniel surprised everyone. He declined the title. I don't want to be an employee, he said. I want to create something new. Lucas raised an eyebrow. Like what? A program. A training initiative for people who've left the industry. People who failed, or burned out, or lost everything. People like me. Give them a second chance. Veronica, who'd been sitting quietly in the meeting, leaned forward. That would be expensive. It would be worth it. Lucas considered this. Then he smiled. "I'll fund it, on one condition." "What?" "You run it." Daniel hesitated. Then he nodded. But not everyone was pleased. Charles Whitmore called for a closed-door vote among the senior investors. He wanted to block the initiative, to remove Daniel from any position of influence. "He's a janitor," Whitmore said. "He doesn't belong in our world." The vote was scheduled for the following week. Veronica knew she had to act. She called a meeting with the board. But this time, she didn't bring Daniel. She stood alone. "I'm not here to defend Daniel Brooks," she said. "I'm here to defend this company. For years, we've prided ourselves on being forward-thinking, on innovation, on risk. But when faced with someone who actually embodies those values, we panic. Why? Because he doesn't fit our idea of what success looks like." She looked directly at Whitmore. "Daniel doesn't need a corner office to be valuable. He doesn't need a title to be brilliant. And if we can't see that, then we're not the company I thought we were." The room was silent. Then, Lucas stood. "I support Miss Lawson. And I support Daniel's program." One by one, the other board members stood. Even Whitmore, though his face was red with anger. The vote passed. But Daniel wasn't interested in the politics. The day after the vote, he announced he was declining the formal title of director. "I don't need a position," he told Veronica. "I need to change the system. And I can't do that from inside it." Veronica stared at him. "You're turning down everything we're offering?" "I'm accepting everything that matters." 6 months later, Daniel stood in front of a classroom of 20 people. Some were former executives, some were career changers, some were people who'd lost everything and were trying to rebuild. He called the program Second Foundations. It wasn't flashy. There were no corporate sponsors, no press releases. Just people, learning, growing, trying again. Veronica visited often. At first, she told herself it was to oversee the investment. But the truth was, she wanted to see him, wanted to be near the world he was building. Sophie came to the classes sometimes, sitting in the back and drawing while her father taught. One afternoon, Veronica sat beside her. "What are you drawing today?" Sophie held up a picture of a woman in a business suit, holding hands with a little girl. "It's you," Sophie said. "You're part of our family now." Veronica's eyes filled with tears. "Is that okay with you?" Sophie nodded solemnly. "Daddy's happier when you're here." "So I'm happier too." Veronica pulled the little girl into a hug, holding on like she might disappear. Daniel watched from the front of the room, his heart full. That night, Veronica and Daniel sat on the steps of the building where they'd first met. The city buzzed around them, but they were still. "Do you ever regret it?" Veronica asked. "Giving up the career you had?" Daniel considered this. "I regret that I couldn't save Elena. I regret that Sophie grew up without her mother. But I don't regret the life I've built since, because it's real, and it's mine." Veronica rested her head on his shoulder. "I used to think control was the same as strength. But you taught me something." "What's that?" "That letting go is stronger." They sat in silence for a while. Then Veronica spoke again. "I want to do something. For Elena." Daniel looked at her. "What do you mean?" "A scholarship fund. In her name. For families who can't afford medical care, or education, or second chances." Daniel's voice was thick. "You'd do that?" "We'd do that. Together." He took her hand and held it tight. "She would have liked you. I wish I could have known her." "You do know her. She's in Sophie. She's in the way I try to live. She's everywhere." Veronica kissed his cheek softly. "Then I'll honor her by being the best version of myself. For you, for Sophie, for her." A year later, they stood together on a stage in front of 200 people. The Hope Brooks Foundation was officially launching. It had funding, support, and a mission. To give people second chances when the system had given up on them. Veronica stepped up to the microphone. Her hands were shaking, but her voice was steady. "A year ago, I thought I knew everything. I thought success meant control, perfection, winning. But then I met someone who taught me that success is something different. It's showing up. It's being real. It's choosing love over fear. She looked at Daniel, standing in the front row with Sophie on his shoulders. Thank you to the man I once dismissed, the man who taught me humility, the man who showed me that being strong doesn't mean being alone. The crowd applauded. Daniel stepped onto the stage. Sophie, still in his arms. He set her down gently and took the microphone. I spent years thinking I'd failed, that I'd lost my chance. But then, I realized something. Life isn't about the chances we lose. It's about the chances we create. He turned to Veronica. A year ago, I was cleaning floors in this building. I thought I was invisible. But someone saw me. Someone believed in me, and that changed everything. He reached for her hand. I'm still learning how to start over, but I'd like to keep learning. With you. If you'll have me. Veronica's eyes were wet. I've been learning too. How to be vulnerable. How to trust. How to love. She smiled. And if you're still teaching, I'm still listening. Daniel pulled her close. Then let's keep learning together. They kissed, and the crowd erupted in applause. Sophie jumped up and down, shouting, "Daddy has a girlfriend! Daddy has a girlfriend!" Veronica laughed, the sound bright and free. She knelt down and pulled Sophie into a hug. How do you feel about that, Sophie? Sophie grinned. I feel like we're finally a real family. Daniel joined the hug, wrapping his arms around both of them. And for the first time in 8 years, he felt whole.